The banquet hall held 200 people, and the particular quality of grief that belonged to communities that believed they were losing one of their own. David stood at the back. He had chosen this position deliberately, not from the instinct to hide, which was not something he had ever been prone to, but from the understanding that the back of a room gave you the full picture in a way that the front never did. You could see the faces of the audience instead of the stage. You could watch what people did when they thought no one was watching them watch. What he watched now was 200 people crying. Some of them were crying in the genuine, uncomplicated way of people who had been told something terrible was happening, and had believed it because they had no reason not to. His mother was in this category. She was at a table near the front, pressing a cloth napkin to her eyes with both hands, and the sound she made was not performative in any sense he could detect. She believed. She had always believed in Vanessa, who had spent 6 years being exactly the daughter-in-law his mother had hoped for. Warm, attentive, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays and brought food when someone was sick. His mother did not know that Vanessa had spent the past 8 months practicing how to look sick. On stage, Vanessa adjusted the silk headscarf. It was pale blue, the color she had described to him 3 weeks ago as feeling calming. She had done research, she'd said, into the psychology of color in illness. Because even now, even facing this, she wanted to be thoughtful about how she showed up for the people who loved her. He had held her hand when she said it. He had thought at the time that the specificity of her compassion was one of the things he loved most about her. He now understood that the specificity was professional. She was speaking into the microphone with the breathy, slightly halting quality she had been maintaining in public for months. The voice of a woman conserving energy, of a body that was working very hard just to stay present. She was thanking the crowd. She was describing what their generosity meant to her. She was using the word blessed in a way that made several people in the front rows visibly tear up. The GoFundMe had raised $150,000. The house sale had generated $620,000. The retirement accounts and credit lines had covered the rest. $800,000. It was currently sitting in an escrow account that displayed a number on Vanessa's banking app that was entirely real and entirely inaccessible. Because 4 days ago, at 11 in the morning, a federal prosecutor named Angela Reeves had signed a document that David's attorney had been preparing for 6 weeks. Vanessa believed she was 48 hours from a wire transfer and a first-class flight to Geneva. She had no idea that the wire transfer was a ghost, the account was frozen, and that 4 people in FBI windbreakers were currently parked in the country club's east lot, waiting for a specific signal. She did not know this. She knew that her husband had agreed to manage the AV system for her farewell slideshow, and that the laptop plugged into the venue's projector was loaded with a folder he had labeled Asterisk Switzerland. She had not opened the folder herself. That had been the one miscalculation of an otherwise meticulous plan. David watched her wipe a tear. It was a good tear. The timing was right, the physical mechanics were convincing, and the expression that preceded it, the brief, upward look of someone gathering themselves, was the kind of detail that a person who had been performing grief for 8 months had refined to the point of authenticity. She was very good. She was not good enough. He had known this since the pharmacy, to understand how a woman could fake a terminal diagnosis, drain a man's entire life, and stand in front of 200 people crying manufactured tears. You need to go back. Back to the rainy Tuesday. Back to the moment his heart broke for the last time. He had built the house himself, not with his hands in the literal sense. He was a logistics manager, not a carpenter, but in every sense that mattered. The design decisions, the contractor negotiations, the weekend drives to look at the property before the foundation was poured, standing on bare dirt and trying to see the kitchen, the bedroom, the backyard where he had once spent an afternoon explaining to Vanessa how the afternoon light would fall in October, because it mattered to him that she could see it too. She had held his hand during that conversation. She had said she could see it. He had believed her because he had built his understanding of their marriage on the assumption that when Vanessa said something, she meant it. And for most of 6 years, this assumption had produced no significant evidence against it. She was warm with him. She was affectionate. She had the particular quality of someone who paid attention. She remembered what he'd said about things, returned to conversations he'd forgotten having, seemed genuinely interested in the texture of his days. He had not understood, until the pharmacist's frown, that the attention had always been acquisitive. She was cataloging him, learning the shape of his trust, so she knew exactly where to press. The weight loss had started in December. He had noticed it first in the way her clothes fit, a small but perceptible change, the kind that happened gradually enough that you attributed it to a workout routine or a dietary shift rather than anything requiring attention. She mentioned around this time that she had been feeling tired, that she had been having headaches. She said it the way she said most things that related to her own physical state, lightly, without alarm, with the particular ease of someone who was accustomed to being healthy and was not yet prepared to take the departure from that seriously. He had suggested a doctor. She had said she'd call. By February, she was thinner by 15 pounds, and there were mornings when he woke to find her already awake, lying still beside him with her eyes open. And the expression on her face in those moments was something he had interpreted as fear, and had felt in his chest like something moving. He had held her in those mornings. He had told her it was going to be okay, not knowing what it was yet, not knowing what he was promising about. On the rainy Tuesday in March, she came home at 6 in the evening. He heard the door. He came out of the home office where he'd been working through a backlog of freight logistics reports, and she was standing in the kitchen, still in her coat, not having taken it off. The way people stood when they had come inside and then stopped, when the momentum of returning home had run out before the ordinary steps of returning home could complete themselves. She had a manila envelope in her hands. He looked at her face. He crossed the kitchen. She let him take the envelope, and then she moved into him, both arms around his waist, face pressed to his chest, and she was shaking in the specific way that a person shook when they had been holding something for a long time and had finally allowed themselves to stop. The sounds she made were not words. They were something prior to words. He held her with one arm. With his other hand, he opened the envelope. The letterhead was from an oncology practice. The language was dense with clinical specificity, the vocabulary of a field that had developed a particular grammar for delivering certain kinds of information. He read through it once, quickly, and then read the summary paragraph at the bottom, where the language simplified because the doctor had understood that the technical density was not what the patient needed at the point of final conclusion. Stage IV pancreatic adenocarcinoma. Inoperable. Estimated prognosis without intervention, 4 to 7 months. Patient has been referred for evaluation for the Hoffman-Bryce experimental protocol, currently available only through the Zurich Institute for Cellular Oncology. This protocol is not covered by standard insurance and requires private funding. He stood in the kitchen with the letter in his hand and his wife shaking against his chest, and the rain on the windows doing what rain did, indifferent and continuous. He did not cry immediately. He read the letter a second time. Then he cried. The house went on the market in April. He had priced it below assessed value because the point was speed, not profit. And there were buyers who understood this, people looking for a deal and willing to move quickly, willing to skip the negotiation phase in exchange for the discount. The offer came in 10 days. He accepted it on a Thursday morning, sitting in his car in a parking garage because he had needed to leave the office to make the call, and he had not been able to make it anywhere that had other people in it. He sat in the car after the call ended for a while. Then he drove back to work. He told Vanessa at dinner that evening. She cried, which she had been doing with increasing frequency since the diagnosis. Sometimes in front of him, sometimes in the bathroom with the door closed, sometimes in the particular silences of the kitchen in the early morning when she thought he was still asleep. He had learned not to try to stop the crying, because she had explained, in one of the long evening conversations that had become a fixture of their life since March, that the crying was necessary, that it was part of how she was processing, and that what she needed from him was not reassurance but presence. He had given her presence. He had given her everything she asked for. The 401k liquidation came with a penalty, 10% on the early withdrawal, plus ordinary income tax on the full amount, which his financial advisor had walked him through with the careful tone of someone whose job required them to present information impartially regardless of the circumstances producing the request. The penalty was $23,000. He had said that was fine. His advisor had looked at him with an expression that was not quite pity and not quite professional neutrality, and said quietly that he was a good man. He had thought at the time that being a good man was the obvious minimum the situation required. He packed boxes on the nights when Vanessa's medication made her sleep early. She was on a protocol, not chemotherapy, which the oncologist had said would not benefit her particular presentation, but a regimen of targeted supplements and immune modulators designed to maintain her strength for the treatment abroad. The pills came in bottles labeled with a clinic name he had looked up briefly, and found to be a registered wellness practice, which had satisfied his inquiry at the time. He packed their kitchen on a Wednesday night in May. He packed the books on a Thursday. He packed the framed photographs on a Saturday afternoon, while Vanessa was at what she described as a support group, a gathering of people dealing with serious illness, which she had started attending in April, and which she had described as one of the few things that helped. He packed the photograph from their 3rd anniversary, the one taken on a dock in Maine where they had rented a cabin for a week, where the light in the early morning was something he had tried and failed to fully describe to anyone who hadn't been there. He wrapped it in newspaper. He put it in a box. He taped the box closed. He went to bed. The pharmacy was a CVS 7 minutes from the house. He had been picking up Vanessa's prescriptions for 3 months. She was too tired most days to drive, and the routine of the errand had become part of the structure of his week. One of the small ways he could be useful in a situation where his ability to be useful felt perpetually insufficient. He knew the pharmacists by sight. He knew which line moved faster. He had the prescription numbers saved in his phone. On a Tuesday in June, he went to pick up the refill on the immune modulator. The pharmacist, a young woman he recognized but did not know by name, looked at the prescription slip and then looked at her screen, and then looked at the prescription slip again with the particular expression of someone encountering a discrepancy. "Is there a problem?" David said. "The prescriber's DEA number," she said carefully. It's not coming up in our system as valid." David looked at her. "What does that mean?" "It means this prescription was written by someone who's either not registered to prescribe this medication, or," she stopped, looked at her screen again, "or not currently licensed to prescribe anything." He drove home a different way. He did not know why he drove home a different way, except that the route he normally took felt suddenly like a route that led somewhere he was not ready to arrive at. He drove through a neighborhood he didn't usually pass through, past houses that belonged to people whose lives he knew nothing about, and he parked eventually in the lot of a grocery store he never used and sat there with his phone in his hands. He Googled the doctor's name. The results loaded. The top result was not a medical practice website. It was not a hospital directory. It was a news article from 3 years ago, from a local paper in another state. And the headline was short and specific, and contained the words license revoked and prescription fraud and * cosmetic surgery, and the name of the man who had signed Vanessa's stage IV pancreatic cancer diagnosis. He read the article. Then he read it again. The doctor had been a plastic surgeon specializing in cosmetic procedures, facelifts, rhinoplasties, the standard inventory of a practice that had nothing to do with oncology, nothing to do with cancer staging, nothing to do with the specific and complex medical determination required to diagnose a terminal illness. His license had been pulled 3 years ago following an investigation into fraudulent prescription practices. He was currently the subject of a civil lawsuit filed by 4 former patients. David sat in the grocery store parking lot. He was very still. He thought about the manila envelope and the clinical letterhead and the word adenocarcinoma in the font of a practice that had been designed to look exactly like the kind of practice that delivered this information. He thought about Vanessa's crying, the way her shoulders shook when she cried, the specific sound, the way she had pressed her face into his chest and shaken, and the way he had held her and read the letter with one hand, and the way the rain had been on the windows. He sat in the parking lot for 22 minutes. He knew exactly what he was going to do. He had always been a man who solved problems with logic, which meant he had always been a man who, when presented with a problem, moved quickly from the emotional weight of it to the operational question. What does the situation require? The situation required many things. None of them were confrontation. Not yet. He started the car. He drove home. Vanessa was in bed when he arrived. She was often in bed by 7, which he had attributed to fatigue and the toll of the supplements and the weight of what she was carrying. He had been quiet on these evenings, had moved through the house with the deliberate care of someone managing the acoustics of a space where another person needed rest. He came into the bedroom. She was lying on her side, facing the window, and she turned when he came in with the expression she wore when she was trying to read how he was, the slight attentiveness, the willingness to be seen, the openness she offered him in the private spaces of their life together that had always felt like intimacy. He sat on the edge of the bed. He took her hand. Her hand was warm and familiar and entirely real, and he held it in both of his and looked at her face in the dim light of the bedroom. and she looked back at him with the expression of a woman receiving the devotion of a man who loved her. He looked into her eyes. He kept his face exactly as it needed to be. "Don't worry, honey," he said quietly. "I just signed the house over. The money is on the way." She closed her eyes. She pressed his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." He stayed until her breathing steadied. Then he went to the home office. He closed the door. He opened his laptop, and he found the contact he needed, and he began to type. The cameras were the size of coat buttons. David had ordered them on a Thursday, through a consumer electronics retailer that sold them without requiring explanation, which was the kind of thing that had always existed, and which he had simply never had occasion to think about before now. They arrived Saturday in a plain brown box. He unpacked them at his desk at 2 in the morning, after Vanessa had taken her evening supplement, the pill he had quietly identified, through a reverse image search of the label, as a high-dose vitamin C capsule sold by a wellness brand with a sophisticated website and no pharmaceutical credentials. She had been taking vitamin C. He had been selling his house. He had sat with that specific fact for a long time before he allowed himself to move past it, because he understood, in the analytic part of his mind that had been running continuously since the parking lot, that the facts of this situation were the tools he was working with, and that the emotional weight of them was something he would address later, when there was time for it. There was not currently time for it. There was currently a problem that required solving, and the problem had a specific shape, and the shape required specific tools. The cameras were 2 of the tools. He installed them on a Monday morning while Vanessa was at her support group, which was where she was every Monday morning between 9 and noon, and which he now understood with complete clarity was not a support group. He put the first one in the living room bookshelf, a small gap between 2 volumes he had positioned months ago and which Vanessa had never touched, because the bookshelf was in the category of things that were his rather than theirs. Angled toward the couch and the kitchen pass-through. Field of view, approximately 90 degrees. The second one went in the kitchen itself, above the cabinet that held the coffee mugs, in a blind spot created by the angle of the upper cabinet doors. This one had audio capability with a sensitivity range of 40 feet. He tested both feeds from his phone in the driveway. Clear image, clear audio. He drove to work. The contact he had typed to on the night of the pharmacy was Marcus Webb, who had been his best friend since the 7th grade, and who was now, at 37, a senior database architect for the National Health Registry, a federal system that maintained licensing records for medical professionals across all 50 states. Marcus had answered David's message within 20 minutes, which was the speed at which Marcus operated when he understood the stakes, and he had understood the stakes from the first 3 sentences. They had met in person the following Saturday, at a diner 40 minutes from David's house, far enough that the probability of encountering anyone they knew was effectively 0. Marcus had brought a laptop. He pulled the license records for the name on Vanessa's oncology diagnosis before the coffee arrived. "Okay," Marcus said, looking at the screen. "This person has not held an active medical license in this state or any other state for 3 years. Prior to license revocation, his recorded specialties were," he scrolled, "cosmetic and reconstructive surgery, rhinoplasty, blepharoplasty. He had a side practice doing Botox out of a shared office space in a strip mall." He looked up. "He has never, at any point in his career, held board certification in oncology, internal medicine, or any specialty that would qualify him to diagnose, stage, or treat cancer." David's coffee had arrived. He had not touched it. "The diagnosis document," Marcus said carefully. "Do you have a copy?" David had brought it. He slid it across the table. Marcus looked at it for a long moment. He was quiet in the way he was quiet when he was processing something he found difficult, not with the stillness of someone who was controlled, but with the particular stillness of someone who was working hard to stay composed. "The letterhead is fabricated," Marcus said. "The practice name doesn't exist in any registry I have access to. The doctor's license number," he typed something, "corresponds to a license that was revoked and is listed as permanently inactive." He set the paper down. "David, this is a forged document." "I know." "She forged a terminal cancer diagnosis." "I know." Marcus looked at him. "How are you this calm?" David picked up his coffee. "I'm not calm," he said. "I'm busy." Marcus had put him in contact with an attorney who specialized in fraud cases, and who had, in turn, put him in contact with the federal prosecutor. Angela Reeves was 44, operated out of the U.S. Attorney's office downtown. and had the specific manner of someone who had spent 2 decades prosecuting financial crimes and had long since stopped being surprised by the variety of methods people found for stealing from each other. She met with David on a Wednesday, reviewed the documents he brought, and spent 20 minutes asking questions in the flat, methodical rhythm of someone building a case rather than expressing an opinion. "The GoFundMe," she said, "how much has it raised?" "As of this morning, $152,000. And donors are located across multiple states." "I checked, yes." She made a note. "Wire fraud becomes a federal offense when it crosses state lines. The GoFundMe alone gives us jurisdiction." She tapped her pen. "The forged medical documents give us additional counts. If we can establish that the funds were being directed into an account with intent to flee to a foreign jurisdiction," she paused, "which a one-way flight to Geneva would suggest." "She has a ticket," David said. "I found the confirmation in her email backup." Reeves looked at him. "You have access to her email. We share a household account for utilities and subscriptions. She auto-synced everything to a shared cloud backup 2 years ago. She never removed me from the access." He paused. "She forgot." Reeves wrote something on her legal pad, set the pen down. "Mr. Vance, I want to ask you directly. You've been living in the same house as this person for how long since you found out?" 11 days. And she has no idea. None that I can detect." She studied him for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating. "Tell me about the house sale," she said. The house sale was where it got complicated, and also David had come to understand where it got powerful. The sale was proceeding. The buyers existed. The paperwork was real. The escrow account where the funds were being held was legitimate and had a legitimate balance. What David had done, with Reeves's guidance and the involvement of a forensic accountant named Patrick Shee, was structure the display. The banking app that Vanessa checked from her phone. He knew she checked it because he had watched her do it twice in the preceding 2 weeks. The focused, acquisitive attention of someone monitoring a number they were waiting to move showed a balance that was entirely accurate as of the moment the escrow account was established. What it did not show, because the account had been converted to a federal hold account after a conversation between Reeves and the presiding federal magistrate, was the freeze that had been placed on every dollar in it 48 hours ago. The number on Vanessa's screen was real. The money was inaccessible, and it would remain inaccessible until Vanessa attempted to wire it to wherever she and Julian were planning to receive it, at which point the attempt itself would constitute the final element of a federal wire fraud charge that Reeves had described as one of the more complete cases she had seen in her career. "She's going to try to move it the day before the flight," David had said. "Yes," Reeves said, "and when she does, we'll have what we need." David had looked at the folder on Reeves's desk, the one labeled with a case number he had memorized because he memorized things that mattered. "She wants to throw a party," he said. Reeves raised an eyebrow. "A farewell banquet, 2 days before the flight, at the country club. She wants to thank everyone who donated." He paused. "She also wants to squeeze whatever additional donations she can get from the people who haven't given yet." A silence. "She asked me to handle the AV." Reeves looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Vance," she said slowly, "what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," David said, "that if the arrest is going to happen regardless, and it is, then the location is a variable worth considering." He told her what he had on the laptop. He told her about the kitchen camera. About the Monday afternoon, 3 weeks after installation, when he had been sitting in his office at work, and his phone had buzzed with the motion alert from the camera in the kitchen, and he had opened the feed. Julian was 24. David had been able to determine this from the social media profile he'd found after running the face through a reverse image search, which was itself something he had not known was possible before this month, and which he had learned from a forum thread at 2 in the morning. Julian had an Instagram account that was largely devoted to gym content, fitness routines, and the particular aesthetic of a young man who spent a significant portion of his time thinking about how he looked. He had walked into David's kitchen at 12:43 on a Monday afternoon. He had walked in the way a person walked into a space they were comfortable in, not hesitant, not checking, just present, the posture of familiarity. He went directly to the refrigerator. He knew where things were. Vanessa came in from the hallway. She was wearing a different outfit than she wore on days when David was home. Not the loose, comfortable clothing she dressed in when she was performing fatigue, but something fitted and real, the clothing of a person who was not conserving energy because they did not need to. Her posture was different too. The slight hunch she maintained in public, the physicality of illness, the careful management of how a weakened body held itself was gone. She stood upright. She looked healthy. She looked completely, entirely healthy. She crossed the kitchen and Julian turned from the refrigerator, and she went into his arms with the ease of long habit. And he lifted her slightly off the floor in the way that very physically confident 24-year-olds did things, and she laughed. It was the first time David had heard her laugh in 4 months. He had not realized until that moment that he had stopped hearing it. Julian had found a bottle of champagne in the back of the refrigerator, a bottle David recognized as something he had put there on New Year's Eve and had forgotten about. Julian popped it with the practiced ease of someone for whom this was a normal Tuesday activity. Vanessa got glasses from the cabinet, the good glasses, the crystal ones her mother had given them as a wedding gift and which she had always been particular about. They poured. They stood at the kitchen island. Julian said something David couldn't hear. The audio was picking up ambient noise, but the angle was slightly off for his voice at this distance. He said it, and Vanessa smiled, the full, unguarded smile of someone who was not performing anything for anyone. Then Julian said something else, louder, leaning back slightly, his voice carrying with the unself-consciousness of someone who had no reason to moderate his volume in this kitchen, in this house, in this situation. So the idiot actually signed the house over. Vanessa raised her glass. "Wire hits tomorrow," she said. Her voice was clear and light and completely recognizable, the voice she used in private, the real voice. "We fly to Geneva on Friday." Julian touched his glass to hers. "To the world's most devoted husband," he said. They drank. David had watched this on his phone at his desk in his office, with the door closed and the blinds drawn and the mid-afternoon sunlight coming through the slats in lines on the floor. He had watched it once. He had forwarded the file to a secure cloud folder. He had gone back to his work. He had a freight logistics report due at 5, and he had completed it by 4:43, because the work still needed doing regardless of what else was happening, and he had always been a person who did what needed doing. He had texted Reeves at 4:50. "I have the video. Audio is clear. It's enough." Her response had come 8 minutes later. "I'll call you in the morning." Vanessa announced the party that evening. She did it over dinner with the particular energy she had when she had decided something and was presenting it as a conversation rather than a conclusion. She wanted to do something for the community, she said, something that expressed her gratitude. A farewell gathering, not a sad event, she was careful to specify, but a celebration. A thank you. She wanted to see the people who had supported them before she left for Switzerland. And she wanted to do it properly, which meant a venue and catering and something with a little elegance. "The country club," she said. "I know it's expensive, but I'll take care of it," David said. She looked at him. "You've already done so much," she said. Her voice carried the precise texture of someone who was moved by generosity. "You deserve it," David said. She reached across the table and took his hand. He let her hold it. "I was thinking," she said, "a slideshow, photos of us, of our friends, something the guests can watch." She paused. "Would you manage the AV? You're so much better with that kind of thing than I am." "Of course," David said. He squeezed her hand. "I'll take care of everything," he said. The country club had a banquet hall that held 212 people at full capacity. Vanessa had invited 206. The room had been arranged with the care of someone who understood that environment was part of the performance. Round tables with white linens, a floral arrangement at the center of each, candles that gave the space a warmth that was simultaneously elegant and intimate. The stage at the front held a podium and a microphone. On the wall behind the podium, the venue's projection screen, 12 feet wide, recently upgraded to a system capable of 4K output, waited in soft standby. David had arrived an hour before the guests. He had introduced himself to the AV technician, a young man named Chris, and had explained that he was managing the slideshow himself, that the files were on his personal laptop, and that he just needed a moment to confirm the HDMI connection. Chris had been helpful and professional, and had shown him the input panel and confirmed the resolution and left him to it. David had plugged in the laptop. He had opened the folder labeled *Switzerland. He had previewed the first file. The 4K resolution on a 12-foot screen was, he had to acknowledge, remarkable. Every detail of his kitchen was visible: the grain of the counter, the crystal of the champagne glasses, the faces of the 2 people standing at his kitchen island on a Monday afternoon with his wife's stolen money still sitting in an escrow account, and a first-class flight to Geneva 48 hours away. He had minimized the preview window. He had gone to find his seat. His mother found him before the guests were fully seated. She came through the crowd with the particular focused movement of a woman navigating a space toward a specific person, and she hugged him before he could speak, her arms around him with the full weight of a woman who had spent months in the particular grief of watching a child lose something irreplaceable. "How are you holding up?" she said against his shoulder. "I'm okay, Mom." She pulled back and looked at his face with the assessment of a mother who had been reading his face for 36 years. "You look tired," she said. "I'm okay," he said again. She held his face in both hands for a moment, the gesture she had made since he was a child, the one that meant she was looking at him rather than at the situation. And then she let go and turned toward the room, and her eyes found Vanessa near the stage, and her expression moved through something complicated. "She's so brave," his mother said quietly. David looked at Vanessa. Vanessa was in conversation with a couple they had known for years, friends from the neighborhood, people who had donated to the GoFundMe, and had come tonight in the good clothes they reserved for occasions that felt important. Vanessa was holding the woman's hands in both of hers and listening with the full, present attention of someone for whom this moment, this specific exchange, this specific warmth, was the thing she most valued. "She was very good." "She is," David said. He excused himself. He walked to the back of the room. Julian was at a table near the left wall, in a dark suit that fit him well, with an expression of somber attentiveness. He had been introduced to the guests who encountered him as Vanessa's physical therapist, the man who had helped keep her strong enough to make the journey to Switzerland. Several people had shaken his hand and thanked him, and he had received their thanks with the practiced modesty of someone performing a role he had rehearsed. David looked at him once. Julian did not look back. David checked his phone. A text from Reeves, in position, East Parking Lot, 4 agents, your signal. He typed back, understood. He put the phone in his pocket. He stood at the back of the room and watched 200 people settle into their seats and find each other and reach for each other across the round tables in the way that communities did when they had gathered around a shared weight. His mother was at a front table, beside his aunt and his uncle and his cousin who had driven 4 hours for this. They were talking to each other with the hushed, careful quality of people in a place where something sad was happening, and they were trying to be present for it correctly. The room was full of real grief, grief that had been manufactured, cultivated, and maintained by a woman, currently adjusting her silk headscarf in a mirror in the venue's side corridor. David stood very still and breathed. The event coordinator tapped the microphone at 7:15. The room settled. Gerald Hoffman, the chairman of the neighborhood association and a man who had known David and Vanessa for 4 years, took the stage first. A brief welcome, a few words about community and love and what it meant to show up for each other. He was genuine, and it showed. The room listened with the attentiveness of people who were moved. Then Vanessa came to the stage. She moved with care, not the exaggerated care she had performed in the early months, when the staging had required more visible effort, but the specific calibrated economy of a woman who was unwell and managing. She held the microphone with both hands. She thanked them for the meals they had brought, and the cards, and the GoFundMe contributions, and the calls, and the particular quality of attention that people gave to someone they were trying to reach across a great distance. She thanked them for not treating her as though she was already gone. She cried. It was the same cry David had been watching for 8 months. The timing right, the physical mechanics impeccable, the expression that preceded it exactly right. She pressed her fingers to her lips. She waited a moment. She found David's face at the back of the room. She looked at him with the expression she had always used, when she wanted him to understand that what they had was the most important thing. He held her gaze. He did not look away. She said into the microphone, her voice carrying through the PA system that bounced off the walls and the ceiling and filled every corner of a room that had gone completely quiet. "Before I leave for my treatment, my wonderful husband David has put together a slideshow of our memories. He's been working on it for days. He does everything for me." She paused. "David, honey, hit play." 200 people turned to look at the back of the room, at the man standing at the AV panel with his hand on the laptop keyboard. David looked at his wife on the stage. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pressed enter. The screen behind Vanessa lit up, not with photographs, not with the imagery of a marriage assembled into a tribute, the holidays and the vacations and the ordinary moments that 2 people accumulated over 6 years of a shared life. What filled the 12 feet of projection screen was a kitchen, a recognizable kitchen, the kitchen of the house that was no longer for sale because David had quietly withdrawn the listing the previous morning. The 4K footage was very clear. Every detail of the counter, the crystal glasses, the champagne bottle, two people standing at the island on a Monday afternoon, with the specific ease of two people who had been meeting in this kitchen for a long time. The room did not react immediately. There was a lag, the same lag that always happened when the eyes received information the context refused to immediately accept. When what was on the screen was so far outside what the screen was supposed to show that the brain needed an extra second to allow the processing to complete. The lag lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then someone in the third row said something, not words, a sound, and then the audio kicked in. So the idiot actually signed the house over. The voice came through the PA system at the volume calibrated for a banquet hall of this size, which was to say clearly, which was to say without any possibility of mishearing, which was to say that every person in the room heard Julian's voice come out of the speakers with the full clarity of a 4K recording made by a kitchen camera with a 40-foot audio range. Wire hits tomorrow. We fly to Geneva on Friday. Glass touching glass. To the world's most devoted husband. The silence that fell on the room was total. Not the silence of people who had been asked to be quiet. The silence of people who have all, simultaneously, understood something that has rearranged every other thing they thought they understood. Vanessa was still facing the screen. David watched her back. He watched the moment the silk headscarf and the practice stance, and the 6 months of performance collided with 12 feet of 4K footage in which her voice was unmistakable. And her posture was the posture of a healthy woman, and the man beside her was the man who was currently sitting at a table near the left wall in a dark suit, with an expression that was no longer somber because the expression had collapsed. She turned slowly, the way you turned when you were not sure you wanted to see what you were turning toward. She looked at the screen. She looked at the room. She looked at David's mother, who was at the front table with both hands pressed flat to the tablecloth, and a face that was doing something David had never seen his mother's face do before. Vanessa's hand came up to the silk headscarf. She touched it. She did not speak. At the left wall table, Julian stood up. He moved toward the back of the room with the instinct of someone whose primary response to a closing situation was to find an exit, and he made it approximately 8 steps before the wall of people between him and the door did what 200 people do when they collectively understand they have been lied to. They did not part. A man David knew from the neighborhood, a contractor, broad-shouldered, someone who had donated $400 to the GoFundMe, put a hand on Julian's arm. Julian tried to pull away. The man did not let go. David picked up the AV microphone from the panel. He had not planned to say anything. The footage was sufficient. The footage was, in many respects, the complete statement. But there was a specific piece of information that 200 people in this room needed right now, because 200 people in this room had given money, and they deserved to know what had happened to it before anyone had the chance to tell them a different version. "She doesn't have cancer," he said. His voice came through the PA system at banquet hall volume, clear, even. The voice of a man who had been solving problems with logic for 36 years, and had simply extended the skill set to this particular problem. "She doesn't have cancer," he said again. "She has a flight to Switzerland with her boyfriend and an $800,000 escrow account. The account is locked in federal custody. Every donation made to her GoFundMe will be legally returned." He set the microphone down. The double doors at the back of the hall opened. They opened the way double doors opened when the people on the other side knew exactly what was on the other side of them, with the full width of both doors, with the particular efficiency of people who had done this before and did not need more space than the situation required. 4 FBI agents, dark windbreakers, 3 letters, moving with the specific, unhurried quality of people who had already determined that the room was exactly as described, and that what needed to happen next would happen without complication. The lead agent walked through the parted crowd with the directness of a straight line from the door to the stage. Vanessa watched them come. She had not moved from the center of the stage. She was still standing at the microphone. She was still wearing the silk headscarf. Whatever was happening on her face had moved beyond any expression David had seen there before, beyond the grief performance and the warmth performance and the love performance, to something that was not a performance at all, which was perhaps the first genuinely real thing he had seen on her face in longer than he could accurately calculate. The lead agent stopped at the base of the stage. He said her full name. She looked at him. You're under arrest for federal wire fraud, forgery of medical documents, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. He paused one beat. Please step down from the stage. She stepped down. She stepped down with the specific, terrible dignity of someone who understood that the performance was over, and that what remained was not a role but a reality, and that the reality had very specific immediate requirements. She held her wrists out. The handcuffs were not dramatic. They were simply what they were: metal, functional, the ordinary equipment of a system that had been built for exactly this. They closed with the sound that they made. Behind her, on the 12-foot screen, Julian was still saying asterisk to the world's most devoted husband on a 3-second loop, because David had set it to loop and had not yet turned it off. He turned it off. At the left wall table, the second agent had reached Julian, who was still being held by the contractor from the neighborhood and who was not, at this point, offering any resistance because the situation had clarified itself completely, and resistance had become a category that no longer applied. Julian was cuffed at the table. The contractor stepped back. Julian did not look at Vanessa. Vanessa did not look at Julian. They were walked out through the double doors with the practical efficiency of people being processed, and the doors swung closed behind them, and the room held the specific quality of silence that followed something enormous. Not empty silence, but dense silence. The silence of 200 people sitting with what they had just seen and heard, and were now in the process of integrating into their understanding of the preceding 8 months. David's mother was still at the front table. She was looking at the closed double doors. David walked to her. He sat in the chair beside her and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that was adequate to the moment, and inadequacy felt worse than silence. He put his hand over hers on the tablecloth. She turned her head and looked at him. Her face was doing many things. He waited. How long? She said. Since June, he said. She nodded once. She looked at his hand over hers. The house, she said. I withdrew the listing yesterday. She nodded again. She did not cry. He had expected her to cry, but she didn't. She sat with her back straight and her hands still under his, and her expression composed into something that was not peace and not grief, but something in between them. The expression of a woman who was processing an enormous amount of information and had decided to do it quietly. After a while, she said, Are you hungry? We should eat. The food is already paid for. David looked at the tables around them, the catered dinner sitting untouched, the candles still burning, the floral arrangements still doing what flowers did regardless of the events surrounding them. Yes, he said, let's eat. He left the country club at 10:15. He drove home the same way he always drove home, through the streets he had driven so many times that the route existed in his hands rather than his head. The neighborhood was quiet in the November way, porch lights on, houses lit from inside, the ordinary domestic warmth of a suburb at 10 on a weeknight. He pulled into the driveway. He sat in the car. The house stood in front of him the way it had always stood, the house he had built in every sense that mattered, that he had designed and negotiated and poured money and attention into, and which had been, for 6 years, the physical location of a life he had believed was a specific kind of good. The house was still standing. It was not for sale. It had not been sold. He was still in it. He got out of the car. He stood in the driveway in the November night air, and he looked at the house for a while. The air was cold and clean in the way that autumn air was cold and clean, the way it had nothing in it that it wasn't supposed to have, just temperature and clarity, and the ordinary, uncomplicated reality of a night that belonged entirely to itself. He thought about Vanessa, not with hatred, which would have required a kind of energy he did not currently have, and which felt, in any case, like the wrong response to the specific texture of what she had done. What she had done was not something that produced hatred in him. It produced a different thing, a colder and more complete thing, the feeling of a structure that has been stress-tested past its tolerance and has been found to be fundamentally different from what it appeared. He did not miss her. He had realized, somewhere in the 6 weeks between the pharmacy and tonight, that what he had been mourning in the months since the diagnosis was not Vanessa, but the idea of Vanessa, the person he had built his understanding of her from, which had been a person she had been performing rather than being, and which had been performed so consistently and so skillfully that the performance and the person had become, to him, indistinguishable. He had loved the performance. The person underneath it he had never known. He did not know how to grieve that specific thing yet. He suspected it would take time. He was prepared to give it time. He went inside. He made tea because it was cold and because the house was quiet, and because making tea was a small, real thing that required attention and produced something useful. He sat at the kitchen table. He looked at the cabinet above the coffee mugs, where the second camera was, and which he would remove tomorrow. He would remove both cameras tomorrow, which would take approximately 20 minutes, and then the house would simply be the house again. His house, the one he had built, the one that was not for sale, the one that would take some time to stop feeling like the site of something that had happened, and would eventually become simply the place where he lived. He drank his tea. The house was quiet around him in the way that houses were quiet when they contained only the person they belonged to, fully, without remainder, without the ambient pressure of someone else's presence. He had not experienced this particular quiet in 6 years. He sat with it. He did not try to make it into anything other than what it was. Outside, the November night did what November nights did. He was still here. The house was still here. And the woman who had tried to take both of them had just received the sterile, isolated room she had earned, without a view, without champagne, without the silk headscarf she had left on the stage when they walked her through the double doors. Just walls, just consequence, just the specific, inescapable reality of a system that had been designed to hold exactly what she had done. David finished his tea. He rinsed the cup. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed in his own house, in the room that was still his, under the roof he had paid for, and he slept without difficulty. The morning came in through the east window, the way it always had. He let it,